This is the Comics Alternative Webcomics, reviews of The Specialists, Hominids, and The Last Saturday. Hello and welcome to another episode of the Comics Alternative Webcomics. I'm Derek.
And I'm Shawn, and you're listening to two guys with advanced degrees talking about webcomics.
That's right. And for the month of February, Shawn and I are going to be looking at three fascinating webcomics. We're going to begin with The Specialist by Al Fukalek and Shawn Gustafson. After that, we're going to look at Jordan Kotzebue's Hominids. And then we're going to wrap up with an already completed, kind of, webcomic by Chris Ware, The Last Saturday. But before we get to those webcomics, we want to let all of you guys know that this episode of the Comics Alternative Webcomics is brought to you by the great folks at Discount Comic Book Service. Go to their website, dcbservice.com, for all of your comics pre-ordering needs. There, you're going to find all DC, Marvel, Image, and Dark Horse titles at 40% off of the cover price if you pre-order. For all of the other publishers, you'll find that those discounts are 20 to 35% off of the cover price, and every month you're going to find some unbelievable specials. Sometimes those specials could be as much as 45% off of the cover price, sometimes 50% off cover, but many times you can find discounts that are more impressive than that.
And if you do prefer your comics in electronic format, we can also send you over to their sister website, mydigitalcomics.com. They have a lot of the same great titles, the same great options, only available in an electronic format for you, so easy consumption on your phone or tablet or whatever. They've got a lot of great publishers like Action Lab, Alterna, Arcana, Asylum Press, and others beyond the letter A even. And as always, they have a ability to earn 5% towards your DCBS purchase by any of your digital purchases. So you get a 2-for-1 deal almost if you buy your electronic comics at mydigitalcomics.com.
That's right. So whether you like your comics fair digitally or in hard copy, you can't go wrong with the good folks at Discount Comic Book Service and their sister company, mydigitalcomics.com. Go there for all of your comics pre-ordering needs. And after you do get your material there, please be sure to send them an email and tell them that Shawn and Derek sent you. You know, we're going to have a fun time discussing these three webcomics for this month, but we're also going to check in with our friends Jim McClain and Paul Schultz about their webcomic, Poe and the Mysteriads, because now that's been up for about a month now, and we'll get an update from those guys.
Yeah, so it should be interesting to see now that they're actually kind of getting the comic up and running and seeing how that transitions over from just kind of the early development stages.
Mm-hmm. But first, let's start off by discussing the first webcomic of the month, and that is The Specialists. This is by Al Fukalek and Shawn Gustafson, and you can find this at thespecialistscomic.com, and that's one word, thespecialistscomic.com. And this one has been going on since, I think, May 2010?
About that, yeah.
Yeah, and it's updated once a week on Mondays, and so there's quite a bit of story. There's over 300 pages of story that we have so far, so there's a lot to chew on.
There is indeed. And what I think makes this will be the first time, if I recall correctly, and Derek, correct me if I'm wrong, I think this is the first time we've actually looked at a straight-up superhero comic on the show, if I remember correctly. Most of the stuff we do are, we've done a lot of noir comics. We've done the fantasy stuff. I don't think we've actually tackled a straight up superhero book before.
No, we have. There was the strong female protagonist.
That is true. Okay. Good correction on your part. I forgot about it.
Yeah. Although that one is, I think in the reason why you may have overlooked that one, it does have a much stronger, how shall I put this, reality base than the specialists do. I mean, the specialists work in many ways, maybe not completely, but in many ways within the classic superhero genre. Whereas strong female protagonist takes the superhero genre and gives it a quite different spin, but it's a spin that's nonetheless anchored in what I would call more natural or realistic comics.
Yeah, yeah, and I think that's it's interesting in that, honestly, I don't think you see a whole lot of superhero comic, like kind of traditional superhero comics in webcomics.
Right.
In part because Marvel and DC just do so well at that already, right? I think it's very hard to come up with an idea and a development that is unique and different enough from what Marvel and DC are already doing. I think a lot of people just don't want to deal with that. And there's not as many opportunities to tell fantasy stories, to tell science fiction stories, to tell crime stories, whatever. So I think that's why we tend to see a larger focus on those other genres.
Right. Although, I just remembered another one, and this is before you came on board the webcomic series, Star Punch Girl. Andy Wolverton and I discussed that one fairly early on in the series. This was way back in March of 2015.
Okay. But that doesn't count because I wasn't here, though.
That's right. But you do make a great observation, though, in that when it comes to the superhero genre, there's really not that much out there in the webcomic sphere. Yeah, yeah.
And like I said, I think it's largely because frankly, Marvel and DC, they've got that market pretty well cornered. If you want to read a at least good, if not really good, superhero comic, why would you not go with Spider-Man or Batman or one of these characters that already has a large history and a lot of solid creativity behind it? Right.
And another reason I think may be that many people, and maybe most people who frequent webcomics, do so because it's an alternative to more traditional comics reading. And part of the traditional part of traditional comics reading is reading in hard copy. But I think a lot of it also is the overwhelming predominance of the superhero genre within comics. I mean, for many people, comics is synonymous with superheroes, which, I definitely don't see that as the case for me. But, I think most people who aren't really into comics, they hear it with the word comics and, of course, they think superhero. So I think if those who like to read webcomics are doing so as an alternative, then, of course, it makes sense that not as many of those titles of webcomics would be superhero-based.
Yeah, yeah. But to get back to the specialist specifically, it's actually it's a little different in a couple of respects, even though it is more or less a kind of straight up superhero story. The first thing I think that sets it apart is the setting in general, right? This is a period piece that's focused in and around World War II, right? Which is a relatively popular setting as far as superhero comics go. That's when a lot of the most famous superheroes were originally created, or in and around World War II. But what Gustafson does as the writer is he kind of almost subverts the basic trope. He still has the same ideas of, okay, we've got these superheroes together, and you've got the one guy with the jetpack, and you've got the Captain America type figure, and a lot of the kind of the standard, what you might call a standard archetypes. But instead of just saying, here we are, we're battling Nazis, go, 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 yay, USA, or anything like that, a lot of the time is spent on the divisions within the United States at that time. And when I say the division, I'm specifically talking about an anti-German sentiment, an anti-black sentiment, misogyny. There's some anti-Jewish sentiment going on, even beyond the obvious Nazism and that. And he spends a lot of time looking at kind of those relationships, and specifically has a set of a cast set that puts a lot of these types of characters into direct contrast with one another.
Right. Another thing that is different about The Specialist is that it makes it stand out as a superhero narrative is it's also to some degree an alternative history. Because what we have is, it takes place in World War II, but it's a World War II that in actuality didn't really exist. When the story begins, for all practical purposes, we're at a period during the war where FDR has now died, Harry Truman has assumed the presidency, and the atomic bomb has been dropped on Japan. However, we learn in the story that a second atomic bomb was actually dropped over Berlin, but there was some kind of malfunction, and now the Americans are afraid that the unexploded, or the whatever happened to the atomic bomb is now in the hands of the Nazis, and so they're wondering if maybe they'll get their hands on the technology. So we're in a period of the war that didn't really exist. The Germans seem to actually have the upper hand to some degree during this period. And so what the creators have done is to take the premise of World War II and then to spin it in often to a slightly different trajectory.
Which, honestly, I think you kind of almost need to do. Because one of the problems, if you go back and read, like, say, the Captain America comics that actually came out in the 1940s and the Superman comics that came out in the 1940s, they kind of don't make sense in the context of the war itself. And what I mean by that is, if Superman was actually around, he'd go over and finish the war in, 10 minutes, right? And if there were a Captain America, if there were a Human Torch, if there were, the invaders or the Young Allies or any of those characters were real, they'd go over and they just wipe the place clean almost instantly, which, would have been great for USA, hurrah. But from a storytelling perspective, doesn't kind of work in a long form serial format, right? So you, I think, have to, as a creator, to make that extended narrative within the context of World War II viable. You kind of have to go off on a tangent a little bit and say, you know what? They did something else. We had to do something else to extend the war, to extend the concept of the war beyond just what these heroes would normally just go over and finish off pretty quickly.
Right.
If you were trying to follow a kind of a realistic narrative, if you had this kind of superhuman soldier to go over and beat the snot out of Nazis and could, rip tanks up off the ground with his bare hands, you could end the war very quickly, and right. that doesn't make sense narratively. So you have to, I think, kind of do this tangent, alternate reality, and invent kind of these other battles and these other incidents to put a little bit more credibility to the story, I think.
Yeah. Well, yeah. I mean, the problem with Superman during the actual World War II is that they couldn't use him. DC really couldn't have Siegel and Schuster create a story where he goes over, Superman, and takes care of the enemy, either German or Japanese, because it wouldn't take long for him to eventually defeat, both major members of the Axis. I didn't include Italy in there, I guess. But I said the major members of the Axis. No offense to our Italian listeners, but and so they held Superman back. and I believe the story that was told there is that Superman felt that he had to be there to safeguard things at home just in case, right? And provide moral support and everything to make sure that the home shores were safe. Also, he didn't want to get in the way of the progress that the American troops were making. Actually, interestingly enough, and I can't remember the details about it, but there was I can't remember if it was a 1-page or 2-page story, maybe 3. It was really short that Siegel and Schuster actually did create, where Superman goes over and gets Hitler and Mussolini and brings them back to the United States. And I can't remember where this was published, but it was, just a little short one-off that wasn't part of the formal, Superman story world. But
yeah,
so there's a lot that they couldn't do.
Yeah, as I recall, I do remember seeing that. I think it was like 3 pages, and I think, if I recall correctly, it was actually published within the context of either Superman or Action Comics, but with the preface that here's why we're not sending Superman over to actually battle Nazis, because look, the whole story takes 3 pages,
right?
And it was set up something along those lines.
Yeah, but I think something else that Fukalek and Gustafson do with the specialists to give it that interesting spin, in addition to the extended history that we have here with the war, is that one, they haven't created a hero like Superman who is, virtually indestructible, right? It can do almost anything. So you don't have a hero like that. Because, even someone like a Captain America, he was still human, right? He had his faults.
Yeah.
Whereas Superman wasn't human. And he didn't seem to have, many faults or at least weak spots at all. So we don't have one of those characters, but we also have, they've given us another team of superheroes, but this one German, the Übermenschen. And the Übermenschen is the German equivalent of the Specialist. And so you have 2 teams, 2 rivals here that kind of could potentially keep the other at bay, each keep the other at bay. So I think that's another little interesting twist, is that the Germans seem to have the same thing that we have, to some degree, when it comes to a superhero team.
Yeah, which makes sense. They had the Nazis in real life. They were working on the equivalent of the Manhattan Project, right? They weren't able to be successful with it, but they were saying, okay, the U.S. is working on this thing. Let's try and do that same thing too. And there was certainly some level of that attempted leapfrogging one over the other. But what I think is particularly interesting in what the Specialist is showing too is we not only see that the Nazis are trying to put together their own super team to both counter and work against the Americans and the Allies, but we see a lot behind the scenes of that as well. Particularly the overall approach, which is very, what's the word I'm looking for? Cruel, I guess, for lack of a better word. And then we see a lot of their failures, right? So, okay, you don't create, even if you're creating a Captain America type figure, right? In the original story, the serum just worked, and Captain America jumped down and grabbed a shield, and he was over in Germany in a matter of minutes. But what we kind of don't see there is, that science doesn't work like that. Even when you're trying something, your first trials don't always work. And we see that particularly, it's spelled out in the Specialists with the German approach to creating their own super team. And there are a lot of these characters that are kind of built up a little bit as almost in a second set of concentration camps, almost, right? Where they're drawing from this pool of people that they want to destroy anyway, and then saying, well, let's conduct experiments on them. Let's see if we can get them to become these Übermen, basically. And not all of them go successfully. And in fact, the part of the plot is that they inevitably fail the first time, so they always recruit twins. So they get the first twin, they try it, it fails miserably, but then they're able to use the data from that to modify the serum to work on the second twin, and that's able to work. But they're essentially killing half of the people that they're bringing in just on GP, on their basic process is designed to kill half of the people that they're bringing in to experiment on.
Right.
Whether or not the experiment is a success at all in the first place, right? It's a particularly interesting kind of look at, we're not just talking about, okay, yes, Nazis are evil and bad guys. It's kind of an easy thing to fall into, but we're really showing here that yes, they're evil, but there's a reason they're evil, right? They're not just evil because they've got a swastika armband. They're evil because they're doing evil things. They're doing very cruel and inhumane things.
Right. Yeah. This is not like a metaphysical evil, right? So it's more an evil that is anchored in context. So it makes sense. But, this gets back to something that you pointed out earlier, and I think it's one of the strengths of the specialists, and that is the way that Fukalek and Gustafson give us kind of I don't know if you call it a behind-the-scenes look, or it gives us a more balanced glimpse into the people who are behind these super teams, right? Including the Americans. As you pointed out, this webcomic does a really good job of showing the divisions and sometimes the prejudices, the outright prejudices that are going on in terms of race, in terms of ethnicity, in terms of class. The main protagonist, Max, is Jewish. He eventually becomes the hero, the Golem, because this is a robotic project that he's working on. And, Max Finkelstein, that's his name. And his Jewishness becomes front and center of this webcomic from the very beginning, right? I mean, we see him in the opening panels or the opening pages with his family, and we learn immediately that his father is a rabbi, that his father would have ideally wanted Max to become a rabbi, or if not that, then maybe a doctor or a lawyer, but definitely not, a scientist experimenting around with the kind of things like the robotics that he's interested in. And then we see with, let's say, the character, what's his name? The Bombardier, who's always masked out in public. The reason that he's always masked in public is because he's African American, and this is it's not a spoiler because you learn this within the first quarter, I think, of the narrative that we have so far, and then that raises issues of race, which again the creators aren't shy to inject into this story, and you have something similar going on, I think, with class as well.
Yeah, and there's an interesting. It's more than just a sequence. It's not quite a subplot, but there's several sequences in there that we're seeing too. That these are superheroes, and they're being trained as part of the military. So they're battling. They're doing kind of standard exercises you would expect. But there's also a propaganda component to this, right? And the military understands that, and they're saying, listen, you have to make these public appearances. And in that public appearances, that means, okay, you, the Bombardier, sorry, don't take off your mask because we can't have a black man representing the United States, right? And that type of thing. We're seeing, okay, this is America fighting for, truth, justice, the American way, et cetera, but that's got to have a nice veneer on it too. And so there's a lot of this type of thing where we're showing, okay, yeah, here you've built this great robot and a Golem character, but you need to wipe that Star of David off the front of it because that's going a little too far. Right. And there's this kind of propaganda, almost jingoism, that kind of goes along with all of this. That's interesting, I think, in showing, yeah, we're not talking the military was out to win, certainly, but they were also waging a propaganda war, not just with Germany and the Axis powers, but also against their own people in some fashion. Yeah, excuse me.
Yeah, no, exactly. I think in many ways you could make the argument that Fukalek and Gustafson are kind of deconstructing not just the superhero genre, but I think the American attitudes toward particular groups and communities during this time, or at least using the superhero genre to do this. And I mentioned race, ethnicity, class, but also gender is thrown into that as well. I mean, one of the things we see with Agnes Devereaux, whose code name, the superhero name, is Lady Liberty. This is someone who is beautiful and just captures the male gaze anytime she's up. And so the creators deal with this in terms of the objectification of women and how women are treated, their place in the 20th century, the middle of the 20th century, this time, all of that. And so I really do think that this webcomic does a good job of highlighting a lot of the cultural issues, the cultural problems that sometimes tends to get swept under the rug within the superhero genre.
Yeah, and especially I like that particularly because one of the things that personally bothers me about a lot of different stories is that kind of nostalgia factor, right? Roy Thomas was great at this when he started writing at Marvel. He would go back to whatever comics that he loved as a kid and start referencing them, right? And that's where that whole Invaders series came from, right? That wasn't a product. The Invaders were not a product of the 1940s. That was a retroactive addition that Thomas came up with. He said, we've got all these great characters. Let's revisit them and let's see them again in action and how awesome they were and all that. And I get that. I get the appreciation of that and that people want to relive some of that, but it still bothers me personally. I want to see what really happened. I don't want to see the veneer version of it, the heavily varnished version of it. I want to see what really happened. I don't want to go back for the sake of going back without getting something additional out of it. And that's one of the things I like about the Specialist is that, he's going back to this 1940s period, which we've seen in, Captain America and the Avengers and, is carried over into the movies now too with the Captain America movies and that. But there's still a kind of a propagandist element to that. Yay USA and all that. And I think that speaks to this nostalgia factor, which I don't care for. But what they're doing here in Specialist is they've kind of eliminated or tried to eliminate much of that nostalgia factor. Mm-hmm. And they're flatly saying, look, you can look back at the past, but let's take off the rose-colored glasses. There was some crap going on here too, right? It wasn't just, yay, we're kicking Nazi butt and that's awesome and go America, right? There was stuff internal to the United States that was going on that was problematic. You want to make America great again, that's fine, but let's make it great in the first place. It wasn't always, right? We were interning the Japanese. We were still had Jim Crow laws on the books. We still were talking down to women and treating them as second-class citizens. Let's be honest about what if you want to go back to that period, let's be honest about what that period is. And I like that with the Specialist, that's kind of what we're seeing. Even though we've got the superhero stories and there's that suspension of disbelief that these superheroes existed in the alternative history that we were talking about earlier. But the social context strikes me as very real and very functional, and I really like seeing that. I wish more people who are doing period pieces were kind of as cognizant of that as they are here.
Mm-hmm. Now, one of the things that we've often talked about on this show is not just the story of the webcomic itself, the content, the art, but also the offerings or the design of the website, because, that's a central part of a webcomic, right? The website, the design, and how you are or maybe not able to find information and navigate your way through that. And I have to say that what Fukalek and Gustafson have set up, I think it, pretty easy to use. We have on this site, we have an About Us page, which tells you about the creators and some of the things that they've done, in addition to this. You also have, I think, a, pretty extensive character list. I think their archive is, good to navigate from one page to the next on. They even have a download page where they've created various wallpapers that people can use on their computing devices. So, I think that it's a pretty well designed site. It doesn't seem to be cluttered at all. I mean, there's some ads there, but the ads didn't get in the way of my reading of this.
No, not at all. No. I think it's solid. I think there's. It looks to me, and I think I've seen this kind of structured layout before. I think they've certainly looked at other webcomics and essentially taken the best pieces of most of them that make sense for them and for what they're doing, and they've done a good job of pulling all that together. But what I like too is that it doesn't look templated. A lot of people will go back to, one of those WordPress templates or something, which is fine. But it looks like it. And what they've gone a way out of their way to, I think, make their site still look unique and within the context of the specialist's, design, I guess, for lack of a better word, right? It's still got that. A lot of it, despite being, the 21st century and we're looking at it on the web, it still has a lot of the elements of kind of a 1940s feel to it, right? And they've clearly put a lot of effort into making sure that that's consistent and consistent within itself and consistent within the narrative of the overall comic.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. Well, do you want to move on to the next webcomic that we're looking at for this month?
Yeah, let's take a look at the Hominids.
And yeah, this is by Jordan Kotzebue. Is that how you pronounce his name? It's Kotzebue. Kotzebue.
That's as good as I'd ever get. So go ahead.
And by the way, if I'm mispronouncing this, please get in touch with us and let us know that we're doing so. But you can find Hominids at hominidscomic.com. And this comes out or is updated every Tuesday. And this has been going on since 2012. And I think early in 2012, February, from what I can determine. Because the individual pages themselves aren't dated, and I want to talk a little bit about that in a moment, because that goes into the design and navigation of this site. But in looking at some of the notes and comments, I think that this first went up around February of 2012, and of course it's still going on now. And what are your thoughts on Hominids?
I think it's a great series. The basic structure of it, or the basic plot, which we probably start with before we get too into everything, is that we've got a series of relatively primitive cultures out there. It's kind of earthish, but a lot more vegetation, a lot greener world. Trees are infinitely taller, that kind of thing. And that we've got
there's a fractured moon.
There is a fractured moon as well, yes. Yeah. So it's clearly not Earth as we know it. But we've got, I think 4 or 5 different species or similar Earth-type species of characters running around. And they're basically all at odds with one another. And then what happens is one of the humans is, or most human character is eventually kicked out of his tribe, out of his group, for saying some questionable things about their religion. Basically, he's excommunicated.
The mountain. Okay, what are they called? The mountain.
Like mountain dwellers or mountain folks or something to that effect, right?
Mm-hmm.
And as he's leaving that, he stumbles across I think they're called tree walkers.
Forest folk, yeah.
Forest folk, yes. And they kind of bring him in, and he was hurt and wounded, and they brought him back and said, you know what, we're trying to build a peace with your people. Can we use you as a conduit? And they say, fine. He says, yeah, okay, we can try that. And then as all of them kind of get together and march over to these mountain people, things start kind of going south in a very bad way for several of these people. And then it's a kind of a snowball effect as one thing gets worse, then the next thing compounds on that, and things seem just to get farther and farther away from this peace that they were hoping to build in the first place.
Right. Yeah. Now, of this world that you were describing, and we do have a variety of different. And do we call them races? Do we call them types? I don't know, but different kind of communities. The two who have so far, and I say so far because this is still ongoing. Things could change another month, several months, a year or so from now. Who knows? But the two communities that we're dealing with now are those who reside on the mountain and those in the forest. And I love the way that. That Kotzebue has set this up, and in that the mountain dwellers are, and this is the way that I read this, they're us. They're more like us than the other tribe, that's for certain, in that they have a particular law that they live by, and that law is primarily religious based, right? And so there is a right, there is a wrong, and then if you deviate from that, you could be considered a heretic. There also is an established relationship between men and women, or males and females. There's the concept of family, a traditional concept of family as we would understand this in the West. And in other words, there's a deep ingrained, what I would call conservatism to the mountain culture. Now, this is in opposition to the kind of culture that we find in the tree walkers or those in the forest, right? And these are the protagonists, as far as I'm concerned, throughout the entire webcomic we've had so far. And these are, if I can put it succinctly, a much more socialist-based community where everyone is equal, everyone shares in everything. They work together in packs. So this race of people from the forest, they're a variety of different packs, but the packs function as packs, but then they come together to form a larger cohesive unit. And so they share everything, and not just in terms of the food and the wealth that they accumulate in order to survive, but also each other. So this idea of a man-woman or male-female marriage, and then that's it, is unknown to them. They're a pack and they work together, so they share mates just as they share food. And at one point, the main mountain dweller that they interact with, Ikari, says, to one of them, but if you have you mate with everyone, then whose child is it? How do you know whose child it is? And the response, I think this is Zona who tells him this, one of the forest dwellers that he actually mates with, is, it's the packs. It becomes everyone's. And so everyone is the father. In this sense, everyone's the mother. And that's the way that they work. And so it's a much broader, open, less conservative community, more ideal. And so that's one of the central clashes between these two races, right? The mountain people and the forest folk. And then that's what brings them into conflict as well, into the actual clashes, the battles, and the fighting that we see.
Yeah. And it's interesting to me in that there's a very clear delineation on protagonist and the antagonist, and which of these approaches is more correct, right? In terms of what's a better way to go about this. There's a very clear moral message that he's writing into this, and that this this adherence to strict religious policies and dogma is not only harmful but almost evil in and of itself, right? And that these tree dwellers are clearly a better people. You know, they're a happier group. They're a more social group. They seem to be better equipped socially. They seem to be better equipped as kind of as a functional collective. When we first see these mountain dwellers as a group, Ikari is talking about how, they just don't function as a society anymore because of a drought that's come through, right? And they haven't been able, the people are literally starving in the streets because in part of this drought, but also because of so much of the resources are devoted to those in power, where in this case, mostly a religious class, but there's also a kind of a military class as well. There's a lot of overlap there. Whereas with the tree dwellers, everybody's just, if one of the people is falling a little bit behind, then you know what? We pick them up, we carry them on. We're all, we work together to make the betterment of all of us, and we're not against any one person because they might not be as good a hunter or as good a food preparer or whatever.
Right. And, I agree with you in that you can easily see where our sympathy should lie. Which obviously is with the forest dwellers. The main character from the mountain folk, the one that we're first introduced to, Ikari. Even his very name, Ikari, reminds us of Icarus. And
Sure.
He's someone who got away or attempted to get away. And his problem was he flew too close to the sun. Well, you could say that the same thing is going on here with Ikari and his attempts to escape the life that he knew on the mountain, and what that brings him and the people that he comes to befriend, the forest folk, and again causing the tensions between these two people. But I really don't think that Kotzebue stacks the deck in a way that is too heavy-handed or even too ideological. The message is clearly there, but I think that he handles it in a very adept manner.
Oh yeah, very, very well. One of the ways that I think is actually highlighted is that there's a pair of siblings in the story as part of the tree dweller tribe, Snow and Gosh.
Is Clumsy?
Clumsy, yes.
Yeah.
That's his nickname. Mm-hmm. And they stand out because they both happen to be albinos. So they look very different than, most of the tree dwellers. Like I said, it's kind of a primitive culture, so most everybody's going around in a loincloth. Including the women. And because of that, most of the people are fairly tanned as well. Except for Snow and Gosh, as albinos, they're essentially just all white. But what I think is interesting is that they also show Snow is very adept at, hunting and acrobatics and all of that. She's actually shown as a superior to some of the other warriors. But her brother Gosh, as we said, is nicknamed Clumsy, and he's nicknamed Clumsy for a reason. He's actually so clumsy that one of the other characters is actually a caretaker for him because he just can't handle a lot of the stuff on his own. He's just a clumsy character, literally trips over his own feet. He's captured multiple times. He gets sunburned very easily. He's just not a powerful character in any sense. But we're shown repeatedly throughout the story too that they're treating him as an equal. right? He's got a guardian to kind of help look after him, but he still goes on with the rest of the pack when they're hunting for food or when they're, going on some sort of mission. He's not left behind, or he's not dismissed because of his inability. He's just included as part of the group. And there's not really a point made of that, I don't think, other than Ikari at one point does question us, like, why did you bring him along? He's no good. And they just say, well, he's part of the tribe. Mm-hmm. And that's pretty much the end of the conversation, is just he's part of the tribe. He comes along with us. So I say all that as a means to say that that kind of element is built into the story structure itself. It's built into the characters. So it's not something where we're seeing a lot of moral heavy-handedness. That's just the way it is.
Right.
As the story is defined and structured. And I think that's one of the great things I enjoyed reading this, is that it's built because of that stuff is built into the story. It flows very naturally and it feels very organic in the development.
Right. In terms of the story's content, I mean, there's a lot of action. There's a great story that's being told. I think the social or even ideological premises upon which the story is built, I think, are really engaging as well. But something else that really stood out to me with Hominids is the art. Kotzebue Kotzebue art is really outstanding. And a little about him, and I find this on the About page of the site. Kotzebue is an illustrator and flash animator, and so he has experience not only in comics, because he's done work in comics and print comics before, but he also has worked with animation. He's done some pencils for the TV series Heroes, but he also works in the game industry as well. So he has worked in studio artists for games such as Bejeweled, Zuma, and Solitaire Blitz. So, I mean, this guy knows his art, he knows his design, and it really does come through clearly in this webcomic. And that's what had me almost from the very beginning. And I think he does a great job, not only in terms of character design, but also in terms of action, in showing action from a variety of perspectives. And I'm not just talking about fighting or battling action, but I'm talking about action of all sorts. And there are many occasions in this webcomic for there to be a lot of action going on, because if the majority of this takes place with the forest-dwelling community, well, these are people who are adept at moving seamlessly from one tree to the next through vines or other means. So there's obviously going to be a lot of movement going on, a lot of action. And he does it well throughout. Yeah.
There's several sequences, I think, where they're just traveling through the forest. And even that, it's a fairly simple act, right? He's just got these characters, walking, swinging, leaping through the forest as they're talking. And it's mostly a point to get some character development and exposition. Nothing could be going on in the background. He could just leave the backgrounds blank and the story would remain the same. But you still have a kind of almost a secondary story, as you can see them traveling as they're going along, because he's so good with these action pieces, as like I said, people kind of leaping from tree to tree or swinging on vines or climbing ropes or whatever. And he does an excellent job of that. Absolutely.
Right. And it's not just the swinging or the climbing, but we also see this with some of the flying scenes that occur throughout this comic, as well as some of the underwater scenes. Now, the underwater scenes become really important because there is something extremely significant that occurs. I think it's in the first chapter, or maybe it's in the second chapter, where we get a little backstory that takes place because of Ikari going underwater. He basically is sucked in or sucked down into the water, and he turns up in this cavern, and he doesn't know what's going on. And in fact, I still don't know what's going on. That's one of the mysteries that's still to be explained at some point in the future. But from what it looks like in that cavern, it looks to be something like a series of screens like computer screens or television screens. In other words, it's definitely not of this, as you called it earlier, kind of more primitive natural world that the story seems to take place in. And there's some creature of some sort. I mean, I call it a creature because we don't know what this individual thing is, that is overlooking this this cavern technology, if we want to call it that. And at one point in the story, Ikari takes the others that he's befriended, Kelly, Snow, Clumsy, Zona, and the others, the forest dwellers, into this cavern, and they find it, but it's not what Ikari had first discovered, right? So it's overgrown, and the technology is definitely not there anymore. But again, that's a mystery that I look forward to discovering more in terms of its solving. Because, what is this in the mists of this land that seems to know of no advanced technology?
Yeah, and that goes to kind of the larger question, too, is, are we looking at a primitive culture that where spaceship crash landed kind of thing, or is this a proposed future element? Right? Is this Kamandi or Thundar the Barbarian or something like that, where we have an apocalyptic collapse of society, and this is the rebuild after that, or something.
Yeah, because I mentioned earlier that you had said that this may be Earth-like, and I said, yeah, but at one point that there was a moon, and that moon is shattered. Now, there may be more than one moon on this world. We don't know yet. Or that could be the Earth's moon, and it has been shattered. We don't know. So are we going to have, as the ending of this, something like Planet of the Apes, where, Ikari and or maybe one of the other major characters screams, you did it, you blew it all to hell. Damn you. So, a Charlton Heston moment in this.
Right.
But no, this is a great story, and I love where it's going. We are into the 9th chapter. Because everything is divided into chapters. Each chapter is roughly about, let's say, anywhere from 25 to 30 pages long. There's one, and I can't remember which chapter it is, maybe 5 or 6, that's about 50-some pages. But for all practical purposes, they're roughly about the same length. And when it comes to chapter 9, I think we're, as of this week, 4 pages in.
Right.
So there's a lot of story here already, and there seems to be a lot of story yet to be told.
Yeah, this is definitely one I'm looking forward to continuing reading. I actually think I discovered it somewhere around chapter 5 originally.
Oh, really?
And it had me enraptured almost from the get-go.
Yeah.
For all the reasons we've already talked about.
Okay. So now we've been really praising Kotzebue's Hominids. I want to look at the design of this website, which I'm not as enamored of, because I don't think it's the easiest thing to navigate. First off, when you go to the main page, again, hominidscomic.com, you're taken to the most recent chapter. So not even the most recent page, but the most recent chapter. And what you get is, in essence, chapter 9, and it shows you what pages are up. Now, when you click on, let's say, page 1, you're not taken to a new screen, or a new page, but you're taken to kind of a pop-up page that then you could navigate through to the next page by clicking on it. And there are also some very small arrows at the bottom of this pop-up page. And I think that, it's easy enough to go from one page to the next, but if you're the kind of webcomics reader that you go from one page to the next and from one chapter to the next, by clicking page, you can do so within a chapter, but not between and among chapters. In other words, if I go to the first chapter, click on the first page, and then click on each subsequent page to get to the end of chapter 1, I can't click on the last page of chapter 1 in order to get to the first page or the cover page of chapter 2. You have to go back out to chapters, there's a tab for chapters that drops down, and you can choose which chapter you want. And so there are some of these that are fairly easily laid out, kind of like an archive, where you can, like for instance, if you click on chapter 2, you can see all 24 pages. And so if you have a sense of where you want to go, you just click on one of those pages, and there you are. On the other hand, there are some chapters, like for instance chapter 5, and I'm clicking on that one right now, that appears to be a little crowded, and you don't see a click-through to take you to the next chapter like you did on some of the earlier chapter pages. I don't know. I think it works well enough, but it just seems that the design is a little clunky.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, honestly, I had similar issues on my end. I was reading most of this on a tablet, mm-hmm. and it, like you said, it worked well enough once I was in a chapter. So if I sat down and opened chapter 5, I could go bing, 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 and I was going through no problem. But then backing out of chapter 5 to go to chapter 6 proved problematic. The other challenge I saw with that too is the screen that opens up, the little kind of the pop-up screen with the display on it, doesn't work well across the board unilaterally. And what I mean by that is, if you're just going page 1, page 2, page 3, page 4, most of that works fine, but he has in there a couple of double page spreads which don't fit into that format very well.
Right.
And, then you kind of get into this situation where it takes up, it's falling off the page or off your screen, and you can't, because it's in this pop-up window, you can't really resize it or move around and navigate it very well at all, in the same way that you can kind of look at the individual kind of regular format pages. So that there's a couple of instances where he threw up a double page spread for, kind of caused a little bit of problems for me. And like you said, switching between chapters. The other thing I would throw out there too is it's not particularly easy to go backwards, right? You can. And so if you're reading through and you get to page 6 or something, and then you say, well, wait a minute, I kind of blanked out on page 5. Let me go back and reread that. You can go back. There is that little arrow button to go back, but is not particularly easy to get to relative to just the smooth reading flow of going forward. And I found that that's kind of a minor issue, I guess, in the broader scheme of things, but still a little bit of a problem I had as I was going through.
Right. And then along with that, the way that the menu board, or the banner, if you want to call it that, toward the top, the way the menus are organized really doesn't seem to make sense to me in places. For example, for me, and maybe there are other readers who would like to who think differently, but for me, almost always, especially when you have a fairly sizable ensemble cast, an important page is a character page or a character list. And sometimes this could have, just very little or sometimes quite extensive information about the characters. And there is one in Hominids. However, it's buried, and it's buried under extras. And so at the top banner with the menus, there's a menu for extras. And then if you hover over it, there's that drop down. Then you can get to the characters. And it's a good character list, right? So we got all the major players here, a description of who they are for the most part. And that works really well. But I'm wondering, why isn't that a page that's prominently listed in the banner toward the top of the page? And the others that you have up there that are prominent, I don't know if they're absolutely necessary. So, for instance, there's a store link, but if you click on that, it says it's currently under maintenance. Well, maybe it shouldn't be up there, if that's the case. There's a download page. To me, that should go under extras. Same thing with fan art. And then there's this other thing, Classic Reader. I clicked on that at first thinking, okay, maybe this was designed in a previous manner, and this would be a way for me to look to see how Hominids used to look. I'm not sure what Classic Reader is. Maybe it's a blog that tells us something about how this was put together. I mean, I'm not sure. it's not really clear to me. It does read like a blog. And so the heading, though, in the menu banner, Classic Reader, seems a little misleading. I don't know. I just think it's a little confusing the way that the pages in the menu is designed. The story itself, outstanding. I really do love the art as well. I just wish that the site itself were a little easier to understand and navigate.
Yeah, I would agree with everything you said there. I had the same problem, particularly with that Classic Reader, because, as I was going through, I ran into some of these problems. Like I said, I was on a tablet at the time, and I was like, okay, well, maybe the Classic Reader will make more sense. And it was like, wait, what this? I'm not sure what this is. And I would agree too. The characters listing needs to be a lot more prominent. I didn't even realize it was there until after I had read the entire comic, and I was kind of doing some additional, let me make sure I'm not missing anything, kind of tooling around on the site. So it's basically everything you said with regard to the navigation and the structure. I would echo that 100%, honestly.
Yeah. Another thing we should point out is that not only the one that we're currently talking about, Hominids, but also the earlier webcomic, The Specialist, both of them have Patreon campaigns. And they make discovering the Patreon campaign fairly easy on the sites. They have banners, in other words, for Patreon. So definitely check these comics out, and if you like them, hey, support them on Patreon.
Absolutely.
Well, Shawn, we've reached that part of the episode where we check in with our friends Jim McClain and Paul Schultz about their brand new webcomic, Poe and the Mysteriad. So let's get to that conversation.
And we're talking once again with Jim McClain, Paul Schultz, who have been working on Poe and the Mysteriad's webcomic. We've been, as you know, following them for several months now as they've been kind of building things up and getting things together to kind of give some background insights on how a webcomic gets developed. And we've actually got the comic launched now. It's up and running. When we talked to them last month, as you may recall, we were just starting off. It was brand new, early January. But now here in February, we've got a little time under our belt. So we're hoping, Jim and Paul, that you can give us some fantastic news about your launch and the kind of the responses you've been starting to get on things, and how has the webcomic been getting across so far?
Well, let's see. We have 49 page likes on Facebook. We were not able to launch the web site like I wanted to. Our web developer got a real job. So she said, don't wait for me. Go ahead and put it up on Facebook. And when we get a chance, then people can catch it up on there. And I said, oh, that's fine. Bloom County is on Facebook alone. So I said, if it's good enough for Berkeley Breathed, it's good enough for us, I guess, huh?
Yeah.
We can hope.
Yeah. I had wondered about that because when I was checking you guys out and in my browser typing out mysteriads.com, it would take me to your Facebook page. And at first I thought that I just made a mistake. And I tried it one or two more times. And then I saw that you had apparently set up some kind of deal where it just takes you to the Facebook page.
Correct.
So that's where you're going to be for now, is updating everything on Facebook?
Until she gets a vacation, yeah.
Okay. Okay, so I didn't know if you were planning on going with another web page designer or if you may want to take it on yourselves.
No, I really don't want to learn web design.
Neither do I.
How about you, Paul?
No, I'm good.
Because something like this, and it's something that I do in one of the classes that I teach at UT Dallas, is it's fairly straightforward just to set up let's say, a WordPress account and to basically begin a webcomic, which in essence is about the same thing as a blog. In fact, it is a blog. It's just a visually heavy blog. So.
Yeah, well, the thing is, I already have one set up that way, so yes, it would be great if it would work like that. But I'm not the person to set it up because the person I have working for me also makes it mobile optimized so that is it optimized or optimized? Mobile optimized so that mobile devices see it really well as desktop configurations and stuff. So I'm going to stick with her because I know her. She has all my passwords already and set up Google Analytics for me. So when she gets the opportunity, we'll transfer everything over. It won't be a big deal. It'll be fairly quick.
Cool.
And you're also since I presume with everything that you're doing, you're actually kind of alluding, as kind of Derek alluded to, you're redirecting people from mysteriads.com to the Facebook page currently, right? So presumably you would just turn that off and you'd still be directing people to mysteriads.com. Is that, I presume?
Right. Yeah, I'm just using web forwarding to send it here for now. And when it's set up, I'll just turn it off. You're correct.
So how are your responses on Facebook? Now you mentioned the likes. Do you have people getting in touch with you? Let's say using the message, something that we can't see on your Facebook page. What kind of response, I guess, in general, are you getting?
Nothing really, to tell you the truth. But we weren't expecting that right out of the box. The thing is, I've got a number of appearances coming up and panels coming up in the next month or two. And when I get to talk to a couple hundred people, I'm sure that will change. I mean, right now, the story, I don't even remember. What page do we have up right now? 3, 2?
Yeah, I think we're on 3.
Yeah, nothing's really happened yet. So there's not a whole lot to react to. We're world building in the first 3 or 4 pages. So
yeah,
the detective mystery doesn't even get started till around page 6.
Okay.
Yeah, and as I recall, one of our earlier conversations, you were also saying that you're basically not doing any like advertising or anything like that, right? So there's the people who are coming to the site are what, essentially your friends, your friends and your kind of close associates who you're basically been able to tell in person so far. Is that more or less accurate?
More or less. I actually did pump $20 into a Facebook ad to put it out there and got, I think it was 48 page engagements or something like that. So we did get eyes on it from that. I don't plan on doing it again. I just wanted to do it out of the box to get people to look at it.
I get a lot of my artists and self-publishing friends and whatnot are spreading it around on their page too. So
yeah,
there's that.
Are you integrating other social networking sites along with this, for instance, like Twitter or Instagram, or using those in ways to bring viewers to your Facebook page?
Let's see. I'm going to write that down. I can definitely start an Instagram page today, so that's easy to do.
Oh, sure, yeah. And in fact, one of the things I'd recommend is to hit the more popular social networking sites again, like Twitter, Instagram, and others, even places like Pinterest. A lot of people don't think of Pinterest because different communities, different demographics use different kind of social networking sites. And if you can just get on as many as possible and set up a way to where when one post goes up, you can fairly easily post on a variety of those social networking sites that the next page is up, then that increases your potential viewership quite a bit.
Yeah. In fact, I'll set up my Hootsuite to cover all of them at the same time. So
yeah, good idea.
I just haven't had a chance to sit down and do that. I've been working on my other book. So it's like Paul and I had a brainstorming session was it last week, Paul? Monday?
Yeah.
Yeah, we sat down on Skype and we banged out the next 10 pages. So we did it. We got a lot of good work done. It's like I just haven't had the time to devote to it.
2 of which are currently on my drawing board as we speak. So
there we go.
Now, have you had any issues or challenges along those lines, and just moving forward creatively, as well as trying to, because before you were just working on the comic exclusively, right? And now that you've got it launched, you're trying to do the promotion and continue, work on and development on the comic itself. You run into any challenges, stumbling blocks with that?
No, I don't think so. We've essentially just been working on the comic. I'm not concerned about the promotion of it until there's enough content there to give people an idea of what we're really doing.
Right.
I ran into this problem the last time I did a webcomic where I was posting content on a fairly regular basis, but it wasn't as frequent. And we're only launching one page per week, so it's really going to be a slow build-up for this story. When Poe actually starts investigating the murder, then I'll worry about getting it out there, because then there'll be enough content that people can sit down and rattle off 5, 6, 7, or 8 pages and go, oh, I'm really interested in this. I have had a couple people say, oh, this looks really interesting, but there's just not a whole lot there yet.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Now, for our listeners to know when new pages go up, do you have a set day each week that a new page will go up?
Mm-hmm. Paul, say something. You get to say something.
It goes up every Sunday, like the Sunday funnies.
Okay.
And I usually do it first thing in the morning, and I'm up pretty early, so.
Yeah, because when I wake up, it's there, so I know he's up before I am.
So that means as we record this, which is on a Saturday, tomorrow the 4th page will go up. Good.
Yeah.
Probably around 5 in the morning Eastern time, so well before you guys are up.
It's like having the newspaper laying on your doorstep.
That's right.
Now, Jim, you also mentioned that you were either in the process of or already have lined up some panels, discussions, and such for the upcoming round of conventions and that.
Yes.
What sort of panel discussions are you going? What types of conventions are you hitting here? Are you going just the little local ones, or something as big as C2E2? I know that's fairly local for you.
Yep. Let's see. On February 25th, I'm at the Michigan State University Comics Forum, and I have a table there, so I'll be promoting it there. And then on March 4th, I'm at the Barrington Public Library. They're having a mini Comic-Con there, and I have a panel there. Then, let's see, March 11th and 12th in Elkhart, the Hall of Heroes Con. And then, let's see, Indiana Comic-Con, I think that's April
15th.
It's a weekend. 15th, 16th, 17th, yeah. And I have 3 panels. I have one each day. It's Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. And so I'll be talking about there. And then the following weekend at C2E2, and I'll be talking about it on a STEM Comics panel. So, yeah, I'll get out there.
Busy man.
Yeah, I was going to say, that sounds like a pretty hectic schedule already.
And then, in June, I'll be at the American Library Association Annual Conference at McCormick Place, and I'll be in Artist Alley. So I'll be promoting it there as well.
Now, Paul, are you going to be joining Jim for any of these, or are you doing you got your own separate run of things, or are you just hermiting up in your basement somewhere or something?
Well, I'm hermiting up so that I can get more work done. I'm not doing a whole lot of shows this year. I'm attending more than setting up that. But no, because my main focus is just getting the pages done so that he has something to talk about when he goes to these things. So I don't really have anything set up for the next 4 or 5 months.
Okay.
I think it would just be. It would behoove me to get more work done than appearances, especially for the webcomic.
But
right.
But next year, when we have enough to actually print something, then we definitely want to get Paul out with.
Yeah.
Because right now, I just basically pay for all this stuff in the process of doing my other stuff. So this, it would just be kind of a money losing venture for us, and I've already been down that road, and it's not much fun.
I can't imagine.
No, you really can't. It's expensive. It's really expensive.
Yeah, he tells me, and I can't believe it. So
yeah. I have the tax return to prove it.
Well, guys, you've been up for about a month now, and you've gotten everything off the ground. So when we talk with you in another month, is there something that you want us to ask you about as a way of maybe holding your feet to the fire of the next step that you take?
No, I think we have a decent buffer right now, and Paul's working steadily. We have another. How many pages do we have done right now, Paul? Almost 10?
Yeah.
And we've got at least another 7 laid out so that he can draw 1 a week. So we're all set.
Yeah. I'm trying to do 2 or 3 a week is my ideal would be 2 or 3 a week. So we'll see how that works.
And we're still meeting weekly on Skype on Monday nights, and we bang out stuff then. I tell you what, it's like we're not even sure how long this story's going to be now. It's like every time we talk, like half a dozen more ideas come up and say, okay, well, let's plot that down the road. And, we were looking at 64 pages when we first set out. It might end up a lot more. It might end up a lot more than that.
I was wondering about that when we got done that day, because I'm like, are we still sticking with 64? Or are we just going to let this thing, play itself out? So I'm good either way.
Yeah.
Wow. Well, good luck in the weeks to come, and we will check back with you in March.
We'll see if we have more than 49 likes.
Let's go. Fingers crossed and thumbs up.
Well, thanks, Jim and Paul, for checking in with us again. Always great to hear from you. Sounds like you're moving some forward there, and we're looking forward to seeing more progress next month.
Yeah. It's fun checking in with those guys on a monthly basis, and we'll continue doing so for a while now.
Excellent. So we're down to our last comic for the show, I believe. Are we not?
Yes, we are. And this is by a creator that, I never would have thought that we would include on a webcomic series, but we are. Chris Ware. And this is his webcomic, The Last Saturday. And, at first I didn't think of looking at this as a webcomic, but you and I talked about this, and yeah, technically this is a webcomic in that it is only accessible, as far as I know, through a web browser. In other words, you can find it online, and you find it specifically at The Guardian. And in fact, the quickest way of finding it is if you can go either do a Google search for Last Saturday Chris Ware Guardian, or go to theguardian.com and then search for it that way. Because, I could give you the URL, but it's really, really long, and you'd probably forget it. But yeah, just go to theguardian.com, the Guardian newspaper, their website, and you can fairly easily find Ware's The Last Saturday there. So yeah, you do see it through a web browser. You can only view it through a web browser, and that qualifies as a webcomic.
Absolutely.
Yeah. But then the question becomes: is this something that is specifically written and designed for web consumption, or is it something that is viewable easily enough through a web browser? Thus a webcomic, but maybe designed in such a way that it may be even easier to read in hard copy form. And, we really won't know the answer to that until, and I'm assuming this will be published, this actually will be completed in print. Now, part of this has been printed. A section of The Last Saturday appeared in last year's volume of the Best American Comics, the Houghton Mifflin Harcourt series. So, yeah, and I remember reading in the introduction to this segment of the anthology that Ware had to redesign things a little bit in order to put it into book form. But, I don't know. I'm just wondering if Ware designed this tale specifically for the web. Have you heard anything one way or another, if he had?
I don't have anything concrete to point to, but I would think, I don't know, based on what I've read, I would say probably not. Or at least if he had, he's much better suited to paying attention to the details in how it would be printed than how it would be displayed electronically.
Okay. Yeah, because the way this is designed, it could easily fit into print format because each page, for all practical purposes, is divided into two halves. And what divides that one half from the other is this centerpiece that basically is the title, The Last Saturday, that runs down, and then the page number that you're on. So, for instance, if you're on page 3, you see in the middle running down The Last Saturday, the words The Last Saturday, and then at the end of that is a little circle with the name Chris Ware and the number 3. And you'll find this on all the pages. So, when this comes out in book form, and again, I'm assuming that it will, the only thing he would have to do is to eliminate that middle part, right? The words running down The Last Saturday and then the number. Now, another reason why I say that I'm just assuming that this will eventually come out in book form is that on the very last page, which is 54, this is only 54 pages long, we see underneath that final panel, end, part 1. So that tells me, well, there's definitely going to be at least one other part. There's a next part at least. Now, it doesn't necessarily suggest that this next part will appear on the web. It could. It could be in The Guardian as well. In fact, do you know, I should have even researched this. Did this appear in the newspaper, The Guardian? The hard copy?
Oh, the printed? I do not know, honestly. Huh. I do not know that one.
Yeah, I should have checked that out. And that would be interesting to know because this can also be a nice newspaper layout as well, because if you open the newspaper up, it could easily take up the two sides of the fold out in ways that would be really interesting, like Little Nemo and Slumberland, right? Just really consume the page and then kind of draw you in that way. But there's going to be a part 2. So when I said at the top of the show that this is an already completed webcomic, well, kind of, but there is going to be at least a part 2, we're assuming, because we're told that this is the end of part 1.
Right.
Yeah. And again, I'm just assuming this will come out in print because why wouldn't it? Even people who do online comics, like Brian Kane Vaughan, who swear, nope, there are no plans whatsoever for this to come out in print. It comes out in print, and I'm talking, of course, about The Private Eye that he did with Marcos Martin.
Yeah. And we're talking about Chris Ware too, right? It's not just anybody just putting something out there and like, oh, if there's enough interest, I'll do it in print. You slap Chris Ware's name on any book that comes out, it will sell. Yeah. So it's not like there's a question of, oh, wait, well, let's see how this does online and see if it. No, it's Chris Ware. It will sell. That's not a question involved here.
Right. And also the fact that this is Chris Ware, right? I mean, he's a legend in contemporary comics. Which sounds funny, a legend in contemporary comics. But yeah, I think that his work and his name have attained, legendary status. His choice of doing this online with The Guardian, I find is interesting. And if he had debuted other work online first, I'm not aware of it. I know he's done some other digital work. He did some around the time of Building Story. But he didn't do all of Building Story online. So do you know of anything that he has debuted first online, maybe in completion or at least mostly, and then in print?
I was trying to think of I could swear he's done something like this before.
Okay.
Again, from, probably 2012, maybe something like that, 2010, maybe. I cannot for the life of me think of what exactly that was or where it appeared. Okay. But I think it was something similar in the idea in that he put together the story and it was serialized through a print publications website and like the New Yorker or the Guardian or something like that, and then was ultimately printed print it up as a book form at some point. I just, for the life of me, I can't remember which one of his stories was done like that, though.
Yeah. No, I do know a digital comic that he came out with around the time of Building Story that actually is a supplement to Building Stories. But but I'm talking about something this sustained, because we have a good chunk of story being told here. Like I said, this, if you don't count the cover page, is 54 pages. If you do count the cover page, which why wouldn't you with Chris Ware, right? Because even the cover page tells a story. That'd be 55 pages. Now, we've talked about the presentation and format of The Last Saturday, but we really haven't talked about the story itself. This is one of those stories that, because it is, as is most Chris Ware stuff, so realistically based, where nothing much seems to happen, in some ways it's kind of difficult to put your finger on it in describing what's going on in The Last Saturday.
Yeah. Yeah, it's really ultimately, just a slice of life story, right? I mean, it's basically this this young kid, Putnam Gray, and his kind of noodling through probably about one school year, I guess.
About a school year. It's at fourth grade, because when this first part, what we have of the story so far, ends, he's just about to enter fifth grade. Yeah. And so Putnam is our protagonist, but another character that is prominent throughout is a young girl who's also in his same grade, fourth, Sandy Grains. And when the story begins, Sandy likes Putnam and wants to be his friend. And even though Putnam is friendly in his own way, he's not friendly enough because he's rather socially inept, and that's definitely not unusual in a Chris Ware story. And kind of turns Sandy off. And especially what turns Sandy off is that Putnam is attracted to another one of their classmates, a really cute blonde with long hair named Rosie. And so because Putnam all the time pays attention to Rosie, to the exclusion of Sandy gets pissed off, and so a good part of this story, she doesn't want to have anything to do with Putnam. But there are other characters involved as well. They're the adults. We get Putnam's parents, his mother and father, Mr. and Mrs. Gray, and then there is Sandy's mother, Mrs. Grains, who is a widow, and we don't know exactly what happened with the husband. He died through some means, but Sandy doesn't have a father. And then Putnam's mother and father befriend Sandy's mother, and that relationship, I don't know how do I put this? It takes an interesting, perhaps, turn toward the end. We can insinuate, I think, well enough what may have transpired, but we're never told, we're never shown anything conclusive.
Yeah. And I think that's one of the, like, kind of almost a hallmark of a Chris Ware story is, right, even though he's fully aware of all of these elements going on, he's very conscious of the
Putnam, you mean?
Well, no. Ware himself is aware of what's going on. He's got this story developed and all these characters developed, but Putnam, as the protagonist,
right,
as the reader, we see things very much through his lens.
Right. So yeah, he's the focalizer here.
Right. So there's a lot of things that we're only kind of hinted at within Putnam's field of vision, basically, right? And you can kind of pick up on things, but because Putnam in this case is a small child, we get the kind of limited view of that, and he's the kind of a lack of understanding of some of the other elements kind of going on. We see a little bit of a superficiality on that. But I think, and that's something that Chris Ware does a lot, I think, is, he's got all these different characters kind of swirling around, but what we see as a reader is exclusive to that particular protagonist's view.
Right, yeah. So, Putnam's definitely not going to see what's going on among the adults, his parents and then Sandy's mother. But in the final pages, and I don't want to give too much away, so I won't tell you exactly what I think happens. There's something that happens that Putnam's parents, especially the mother, is mad with the father, so they're upset with one another, and something didn't go right. And so the parents storm home. They had been staying with the Grains. In other words, Putnam had a sleepover at Sandy's house, but Putnam wasn't the only one who was there at the house.
Right.
So, but again, all of this, I mean, not only does it take place off panel, so to speak, but as you said, the way it's the information is revealed here, the information comes to us in ways that it would Putnam, right? He is completely oblivious to this stuff going on. And so anything in terms of filling in the blanks, we have to do quite a bit of, I think, when it comes to the adults. But you know, there is a lot going on that Putnam is aware of. And those things that Putnam is very much aware of is his standing in his own environment with the kids at school, right? So we know that Sandy's interested in him, but then pissed off at him. We do know that he's interested in Rosie, but Rosie doesn't want to seem to have anything to do with him. We know that Putnam is quite a bit of an outcast, that he's picked on. He has a different way of looking at the world, and so that makes him an outsider to other kids his age. Again, kind of a typical Chris Ware type of character, right? A typical Chris Ware scenario.
Right. Yeah, and it's interesting to follow, and it's interesting to follow because, you know, it's a very kind of down to earth, realistic approach to a character, right? And we see, in a lot of senses, that, you know, we're seeing Putnam's world through Putnam's eyes in exactly the same way that you pick up any Chris Ware comic. You see he's very clear on what that character's perspective on the world is, both visually and kind of emotionally and mentally. And then, you know, on top of it just the sheer talent of the creative end of things, right? And, you know, it's got a lot of the typical kind of Chris Ware elements of showing how all the pieces work together in almost a visual map as the elements play together and that. So it's very clear. It's very strong in the same way that every other Chris story is. He's clearly spent a lot of time and attention to the detail on even something as simple as Putnam walking home from school and just happens to be passing a handful of houses, you know, along on the sidewalk or something like that. Right.
In fact, there are a few scenes like that you just described, you know, him walking home from school and the way that the panels are designed. It's a panorama, but it's a panorama that's broken up into individual panels, right? But still he is navigating those various panels. That's a part of the larger tapestry. In fact, one of those scenes is actually excerpted in last year's volume of Great American Comics as an example of this. Yeah, the design of this webcomic is very similar to the kind of design that you see in almost any Chris Ware comic. So, I mean, there's really what we get with Chris Ware in The Last Saturday and what we get with Chris Ware in all of his other books, right? There's really not much of any difference. And so that's another reason why I find it interesting that he chose to take The Last Saturday and to serialize it online before doing anything in print.
Yeah, that was actually that was one of the things I was actually disappointed with in this. It looks very much to me like a story that Chris Ware was very conscious, as he always is. He's very conscious of how he's laying it out, how it looks on the overall page, how the eye flows across the page, how the reader interacts with things. But it almost struck me like he was designing this for a newspaper, not for an online experience. It looks to me like this would. I can't help but look at this and say this would look so much better if this was on a news sheet spread, right? I think this would work phenomenally well on that, where you get a better sense of the entire page all at once, and you don't have to scroll around because of navigation issues, right? The navigation seems incidental to this. It looks like he had no consideration for the fact that you had to click on something to go to the next page at all.
Right. Well, that's another one of the reasons why I wondered if this actually did appear in print, in the Print Guardian, and if there are any of our, let's say, UK listeners who have read this in the newspaper, then definitely get in touch with us and let us know about your experience with this, if this is the case, and what it was like reading The Last Saturday in print in a newspaper as opposed to online like this.
Yeah. Yeah, I'd be curious to see. I'd be curious to know if he did, if he planned on that specifically and specifically wanted this to be read online, or if that was more an opportunity that was presented to him and he said, "Yeah, okay, I'll give it a shot," kind of thing. I'd be curious to know how he kind of fell into this.
Yeah. Well, in this sense, it's not really any different from what a lot of other, let's say, established and even really big name creators have done when it comes to new work that they've serialized online through a newspaper. And I'm thinking in particular, several years back and for a while, the New York Times Magazine had, what was that called? The funny pages, that section.
Yeah.
And that's where, I think Daniel Klaus, what did he have? What was his story that he eventually came out with in print? But I'm blanking here. It wasn't Wilson. It was, oh God, and our listeners probably now are yelling at their iPod. It's like, you can't remember that name. But yeah, he serialized a story. Jason serialized, I think it was Low Moon. And there were several others that, well-known creators who serialized stories through the New York Times Magazine's Funny Pages series. Now, if you look at those, or if you remember those, they were designed, laid out like any other comic, one maybe intended for print. And that's what we're saying here with Where's the Last Saturday, right? So they're using an online format in a way that doesn't really accentuate what an online webcomic format could potentially bring you, because the end result ultimately is probably print, right? So they can't do anything too different or too radical with the online presentation of their story, because it would have to translate into print eventually.
Yeah, and I think I have to wonder how much of that is driven by the publishers themselves versus how much is driven by the creators, right? Because I think a lot of these creators are looking at this as essentially an assignment, basically, right? They're not necessarily, they're looking to tell a story, but they're not as typically concerned with the venue specifically, versus, the publishers, the print publishers are more concerned with this content as well, and also not as versed in, kind of the intricacies of webcomic development and online interaction and that kind of thing, because they have these long histories of developing things in print and not online. I think there's some interest. I think there's a lot of interesting discussions that must happen behind the scenes that I'd love to be privy to.
Right. By the way, Mr. Wonderful is that title that for some weird reason I couldn't remember. Daniel Klaus's Mr. Wonderful. And now I do know that in print in the New York Times Magazine, we did get, Mr. Wonderful, Low Moon, and several of these other stories. So they were in print. I just don't know if The Last Saturday appeared in The Guardian in print. So again, if you're listening and you know about this and you've actually seen it, definitely do get in touch with us and let us know. Well, Shawn, we had a full plate. We started off with a discussion of Al Fukalek and Shaw Gustafson's The Specialist. And then after that, we looked at the great greatly illustrated, wonderful story of Hominids by Jordan Kotzebue. And then after a brief romp with Paul and Jim about the update on their webcomic, we looked at Chris Ware's The Last Saturday, which originally appeared in The Guardian.
Lots of great stuff there. I'm just glad that I leave you to pronouncing everybody's names.
Yeah, and I fumbled a number of times, I'm sure, on this episode with the names. But hey, guys, at least we try to pronounce your names correctly.
Let us know if we haven't. That's always a good thing. We're happy to take corrections on that. We do the best we can, but we're only human too, right? So
that's right. And if you like to find great comics like the kinds that we discuss on the Comics Alternative, then definitely check out the site of our sponsor, which is Discount Comic Book Service. So go to dcbservice.com if you want to find great deals on print comics. But you should also visit their sister company, mydigitalcomics.com, if you like your comics in digital form. So either of those, a great way of getting your comics. And after you do get your titles there, get in touch with us and let us know what you thought about our lame attempts to pronounce names correctly on this month's webcomics episode. If you go to the website, comicsalternative.com, you'll find that you can leave us a voice message online via SpeakPipe. Or you can call us the old-fashioned way by picking up the phone and dialing 415-3-COMICS. That's 415-326-6427.
And if you're less worried about pronunciation but want to get across some good emails or website addresses that are easier to write down and just click on, you can use the email format to get to us too. You can email us both at twoguys, TWOGUIS, at comicsalternative.com. Or you can email me directly at Shawn, SEAN, at comicsalternative.com.
And you can contact me directly at Derek at comicsalternative.com. You can find us all over social media, such as Twitter, Facebook, Tumblr, Instagram, Google+, Goodreads, Pinterest, and YouTube. You can subscribe to the podcast through iTunes. You can stream us on Stitcher. You can also find us on TuneIn, on Spotify, on iHeartRadio, and on Google Play Music. But you can find every single one of our podcast episodes, as well as the reviews and comics-related commentary that we post on our blog, simply by going to our website, which is, again, comicsalternative.com.
Always the best place to reach us, and always happy to hear from all of you.
That's right. And we will be back next month with more webcomics fun. Until then, I'm Derek.
And I'm Shawn, and we'll see you next month.